The official national feed that morning still talked about recovery corridors, emergency supply lanes, and public patience. Out in Jasper County, the question was whether a refrigerated tanker could get through a fuel checkpoint before the milk crossed the line from food to waste. That was the first hour of the week, when the public still thought the worst thing had already happened. I was taking farm calls from a temporary room in Des Moines with a battery lantern on the table, 2 paper county maps pinned against the wall, and a stack of handwritten fuel notes that kept changing faster than I could read them. The cities that had been hit were still smoking. Some cities were gone from normal communication altogether. I will not pretend we had a clear map of the country. We had pieces. We had county sheriffs, elevator managers, farm cooperative drivers, veterinarians, hospital engineers, road crews, grain merchandisers, and tired people calling from landlines that still worked when the switching equipment stayed powered. The national people had satellite language. We had the sound of real operations failing one at a time. The sky outside the window did not turn black. That is not how it started here. It was worse in a quieter way. The morning came late. The clouds were high and dirty with a brown-gray cast that did not match a thunderstorm, wildfire, smoke, fog, or any winter system I had watched in more than 40 years of farm reporting. The sunlight had no strength in it. At 9 in the morning, the parking lot still looked closer to dawn. Thermometers were already wrong against the forecast, not by 1 degree or 2, but enough that crop people started calling each other without waiting for a weather office update. Everybody knew something was off before anybody wanted to say the words nuclear winter. I had spent my life telling people grain prices, feeder cattle movement, planting delays, storm warnings, river levels, diesel availability, and whether a county bridge was open to loaded semis. That kind of talk sounds dull until dull talk becomes the only thing keeping a town from making a stupid move. After the exchange, people wanted certainty. They wanted somebody to say the war was over, the fallout was somewhere else, the roads would reopen, the stores would restock, and the lights would come back once crews finished repairs. I could not give that. What I could give was a list of what still worked, what did not, and what would fail next if we lied about it. By mid-morning, I had 5 confirmed fuel points in central Iowa and 13 false ones. I had 1 working grain elevator in Boone County that could dump trucks but could not dry anything because the gas supply was unstable. I had 2 elevators that had power but no crews, and 1 elevator in Tama County with crews but no safe way to move grain because the rail dispatcher had stopped taking non-emergency freight. On any normal week, grain leaving Iowa did not just become bread, cereal, cooking oil, ethanol, feed, or export cargo by good intentions. It moved by truck, rail, and barge. It moved through elevators, processors, mills, feed plants, river terminals, and ports. Every link needed power, fuel, labor, paperwork, and trust. That was the part people in the suburbs did not understand yet. Food was not sitting in one giant room waiting for a fair person with a clipboard. Corn was in bins. Soybeans were in bins. Pork was walking around in confinement buildings that needed ventilation. Milk was in bulk tanks that needed cooling. Eggs were in houses that needed feed delivery and temperature control. Cattle needed water pumped from wells. Frozen food needed freezers. Hospitals needed diesel for generators. Truckers needed fuel, tires, passable bridges, and a reason to risk a route. Grocery shelves were the last few inches of a long machine, and that machine had taken hits in places no customer had ever seen. A county emergency manager from Story County called just before lunch and asked me to stop saying available diesel without saying restricted. Diesel, he was right. Available did not mean free for anybody with a tank. It meant the sheriff had 2,000 gallons under guard at a public works yard. The hospital had requested most of it, and the county engineer wanted enough to keep graders and bridge inspection trucks moving. A hog operation north of Ames needed diesel for backup power, or it would start losing animals by the building. A water district needed diesel to keep pressure up. A volunteer fire department had 1 tanker truck and a list longer than the road to Nevada. Nobody on that list was lying about need. Then my son called from a feed supply route near Marshalltown. He had a straight truck loaded with bagged mineral, antibiotics held under temperature control, and feed additives that 3 swine operations had already paid for before money stopped meaning the same thing. He was not supposed to be on the road after noon, but a deputy at the checkpoint had waved him through because the barns were already running low. He asked me whether the bridge east of town had been cleared for loaded traffic. I had the note in front of me. Bridge inspection pending. No heavy trucks. I had to tell him that on an open line, knowing a hospital fuel coordinator was waiting for me to clear the same county route for a generator shipment. People call that a personal conflict when it is written down. In real life, it is just your hand going cold around a pencil. My daughter was working at the hospital in Ames. Her building had backup power, but backup power is not magic. It burns fuel. It needs filters, load management, maintenance, and guarded deliveries. The hospital had patients on oxygen, refrigerated medicines, surgical areas, warming rooms, and people coming in with injuries from panic travel, exposure, and bad water. My son had farms on his route where animals would start dying if feed and water systems stopped. I had both of them on the same map, and I had 1 road note, 1 fuel note, and no clean answer. The national broadcast at noon used the phrase temporary atmospheric disturbance. That phrase made 3 agronomists call me within 10 minutes. 1 was from Iowa State, 1 was retired from Extension, and 1 had spent half his career measuring crop stress after late cold snaps. None of them wanted panic. All three said the same thing in plain terms. If enough smoke and soot got high into the atmosphere, especially the upper layers where rain would not wash it out quickly, sunlight would drop and temperatures would fall. A cold week was survivable. A cold season at the wrong time could break planting, pollination, feed supply, pasture growth, and every forecast built around normal weather. I said that on air without dressing it up. I told people ash on a windshield was not the same problem as soot high above the weather. Fallout was a separate danger and had to be handled by radiation monitoring and local emergency warnings. The dimming sky was about smoke from burning cities and industrial areas reaching levels where it could spread wide and last. I told listeners not to scrape ash barehanded, not to bring outdoor dust into livestock feed, not to let children play in dirty runoff, and not to assume a normal rain would fix the sky. Then I told farmers to write down morning and afternoon temperatures, soil readings if they had them, fuel levels, feed inventory, water access, and animal numbers. Data was becoming food. That sounds dramatic now, but I meant it in the most boring way possible. If a county knew it had 20 working diesel generators and 6 fuel trucks, it could choose. If it lied and said everything was stable, it would lose power in places that mattered and then choose in the dark. If a feed mill knew how much corn, soybean meal, mineral, and bagging material remained, it could ration with a plan. If every farmer guessed alone, some barns would hoard too much while other barns lost animals. If a town knew how many refugees had arrived, how many school buses could move people, how many church kitchens could cook, and how much propane was left, it had a chance to avoid a fight at the grocery door. The first refugee convoy I could verify reached Grinnell in the early afternoon. It was not a military convoy. It was families, college students, 2 church vans, a plumbing truck, a half-loaded delivery van, and 4 cars that had been driven until the fuel gauges were below empty. They had come from the direction of the Chicago corridor through broken pieces of road information, rumor, and luck. Some had burns. Some had no visible injuries at all and kept asking whether Des Moines was taking people. Grinnell was not prepared for them. No town was. Rural communities have land, and outsiders mistake land for food. Land does not feed anyone by sunset. A woman from a church kitchen asked me how many meals could be made from the canned goods in their pantry. I told her I could not answer from a studio desk. Then I asked her what she had, how many can openers, how many burners, how much water, how many volunteers, how many people needed special diets, and whether the town still had trash pickup. She got quiet after the trash question. Food service is not only food, it is water, heat, soap, containers, toilets, waste, crowd control, and people willing to stand there for hours while frightened strangers accuse them of holding back. By late afternoon, Grinnell had enough meals for that night and no honest plan for the next week. Around 3, the temperature dropped again. It was not a hard freeze in Des Moines, but reports north of Fort Dodge and Mason City showed readings that belonged to a different forecast. This mattered because late spring crops were already under stress in some counties. Corn can sit in cold soil and rot if conditions go wrong. Soybeans do not appreciate cold, wet ground either. Hay growth slows, pasture recovery slows, fruit blossoms can be lost fast. Gardens that families suddenly cared about more than they had cared a week before could be damaged before people even understood the new rules. One cold day was a warning. Several dim cold days in a row were a planning emergency. I had one caller from near Decorah who said his alfalfa looked dusty, and he wanted to know whether to cut early before contamination got worse. I did not tell him yes or no. I put him through to an extension forage specialist who told him to keep animals off visibly contaminated forage until local guidance caught up, to avoid mixing unknown ash into feed and to protect stored hay first. That became the pattern of the day. People wanted decisive commands. Honest experts gave conditional answers because conditions mattered. That frustrated listeners, but bad certainty kills farms quicker than careful uncertainty. By the evening, payment systems were already a mess. The rural banks that had power were limiting withdrawals. Card networks were inconsistent. Grain contracts could not be settled cleanly because markets were frozen or meaningless. Livestock buyers were not bidding in any normal way. A farmer near Carroll told me a neighbor had offered $1,000 cash for diesel, and the farm cooperative manager refused because cash could not create more fuel. That manager was called greedy by people who did not understand the tank. A full wallet cannot run a feed mill. A signed contract cannot open a closed rail line. A handshake cannot cool milk when the compressor is dead. That night, I slept in a chair for maybe 40 minutes and woke to a list of counties that had gone from partial power to no power. The state was not dark in one clean sweep. That would have been easier to describe. It failed unevenly. Some towns had lights around the courthouse and darkness 3 blocks away. Some farms had generators and no fuel. Some had fuel and broken transfer pumps. Some had old tractors that would run and new equipment locked behind electronics that did not appreciate. Dirty power, voltage swings, or missing parts. Repair shops became more important than press conferences. A man who could rebuild a pump or patch a belt became a public asset. On the second morning, the sun came up weak again, and this time nobody called it cloud cover. The weather people were careful, but you could hear it in their voices. The models did not know what to do with a sky altered by war. Normal forecasts take known inputs and calculate likely outcomes. We had new smoke layers, damaged observation networks, disrupted aircraft reports, interrupted satellite data, and local ground readings that did not match old expectations. Farmers understand bad forecasts better than most people. A forecast is a tool, not a promise. That morning the tool was bent. I opened with road conditions because roads had become the first gate in the food system. Interstate 80 had long stretches open, then sudden closures around bridge inspections, fuel checkpoints, law enforcement holds, and abandoned vehicle clusters. Interstate 35 was moving emergency traffic in pieces. United States Highway 30 had local blockages. Highway 20 was better in places and useless in others. The Mississippi River terminals were operating under restricted power and security. Barge traffic was uncertain because crews, locks, towboats, river conditions, and port instructions were all tied into national emergency routing. Grain could sit in Iowa while people elsewhere went hungry, not because farmers refused to sell, but because movement itself had become the scarce thing. A feed mill outside Cedar Rapids called to say it had orders stacked past any sane limit. Poultry houses needed feed on tight timing, hogs needed scheduled rations, dairy cattle could not be handled with vague promises. The mill had ingredients for some formulas but not others. It had bulk capability but not enough bags. That tiny detail made people mad. Bags sound stupid during a national disaster until you need to move feed to smaller operations without bulk bins or working augers. Packaging is part of food. Pallets are part of food. Forklifts are part of food. Diesel for the forklift is part of food. A missing roll of labels can stop a shipment when inspectors still have to know what is inside. The first real argument I heard in the room came over a diesel allocation note from Story County. The hospital requested a guarded delivery. A swine integrator requested the same fuel window for barn ventilation. A municipal water plant needed enough to maintain pressure. A volunteer ambulance service was nearly dry. The emergency manager asked for my latest list because drivers were using our updates to decide where to go. That made my job dangerous in a new way. If I said a location had fuel, desperate people might swarm it. If I said nothing, legitimate trucks might waste the last gallons searching. Information could save fuel or burn it. My daughter got one message out near 10 that morning. She did not ask me to help her. She asked whether farms north of Ames were still sending refrigerated trucks, because the hospital cafeteria was already shifting to rationed meals and the kitchen manager wanted protein that could be cooked fast. That was my daughter. Practical even when exhausted. A hospital is not just beds and doctors. It feeds patients, staff, families, and sometimes the people who show up because no other building in town has light and heat. The kitchen had plenty of good people and not enough certainty. Nobody teaches a nurse how to think about soybean meal, diesel logistics, and county road bridges. That week taught everybody. My son, meanwhile, was parked near Marshalltown with a feed order he could not deliver because the bridge restriction held and the detour took him through a checkpoint that had closed to non-medical traffic. He could see the road he needed. He could not legally use it. The farmer waiting on him had 2 barns already on reduced feed curves and a generator alarm that kept chirping. My son asked me whether he should try a gravel route. I told him no. That was not fatherly wisdom. That was road math. A stuck feed truck on a soft shoulder helps nobody. A rolled truck blocks a county route and wastes feed. He swore once, then said he knew. Then the line went dead. By noon on the second day, we stopped giving grain prices. There were still numbers moving somewhere on paper, but they did not describe reality in Iowa. Price requires a market. A market requires buyers, sellers, delivery, payment, grading, storage, risk, and trust that tomorrow will exist in a recognizable form. We replaced the price segment with inventory calls. County by county, we asked elevators to report whether they could receive, load, dry, aerate, test moisture, run scales and contact rail or truck dispatch. Some did not want to answer publicly, understood. A bin full of grain had become both wealth and danger. Hungry people do not always understand why corn in a bin cannot be eaten from the scoop shovel. That afternoon, a sheriff from Poweshiek County called and told me to quit using the word refugee without explaining scale. He said 20 people at a church is different from 2,000 people at a fairground. He was right. Rural counties can absorb hardship in neighbor-sized pieces. They cannot absorb a city in a weekend. Damaged urban areas were pushing people outward. And every rumor said Iowa had food because Iowa had farms. The cruel truth was that Iowa had production, not instant meals. A hog barn is not a public pantry. A grain bin is not a bakery. A field is not dinner. Turning production into safe food requires time, equipment, sanitation, labor, fuel, and law. The calls got uglier after that. A man outside Iowa City said a group from the highway tried to force entry into a farm shop because they saw a fuel tank. A mayor near Waterloo said locals wanted to block every outsider before the town was overrun. A pastor from Newton said that would condemn families who had nowhere else to go. A county supervisor from Boone said he had elderly residents who would freeze if propane deliveries stopped. None of them were wrong inside their own circle. That was the problem. Disaster makes circles smaller unless somebody keeps forcing information across the lines. I told listeners to stop spreading target rumors. That was the phrase I used. Target rumors. Not because I had any classified knowledge, but because people were calling every rail yard, power plant, hospital, and food warehouse a future target. Those rumors caused movement, and movement burned fuel. Movement also clogged roads needed by repair crews and medical transport. If you had a safe place, water, food, heat, and no official order to move, stay put. That was the most useful sentence we had, and it was the hardest one for scared people to obey. Near sunset, The ashfall increased west of Des Moines. Again, I want to be clear, what fell on cars and roofs was not proof of the same danger everywhere. Some ash was ordinary combustion debris carried by wind from fires. Some dust could have had hazardous material. Fallout risk depended on where blasts hit, wind patterns, height, rain, and time. We told people to follow local radiation guidance, keep animals from eating contaminated surface feed, cover open water where possible, and avoid stirring dust indoors. We also told them not to waste clean water washing every driveway in town. People wanted visible action. Sometimes visible action was just a way to use up what they needed later. On the third day, winter entered the barns before it entered the calendar. A poultry producer near Ottumwa reported ventilation problems because power cycling kept tripping controls. The birds were not freezing yet, but the system was unstable, and birds in modern houses depend on air movement, feed lines, water nipples, and alarms. A dairy south of Waterloo had cows dropping production because the routine had broken. Late feed, cold stress, milking delays, poor sleep for workers, and uncertainty around pickup. A cattle feeder near Sioux City said water was his first worry, not feed. Wells need pumps. Pumps need power. Hauling water to large animals takes equipment and fuel. You can have hay in the yard and still lose animals if water stops. That morning, I made the first announcement that got me threatened. I said towns should inventory livestock before promising meat to refugees. I said animals were not cans on a shelf. Processing required trained workers, clean water, cold storage, inspection decisions, waste handling, transport, and security. Slaughtering too many animals early could create a short burst of food and a long shortage afterward. Leaving animals without feed and water was also cruelty and waste. The decision had to be local, recorded, and tied to storage capacity. A man called me a coward for not telling farmers to open everything. Another called me a thief for suggesting any inventory at all. I did not blame either one. Fear had them by the throat. The federal voice that day sounded calmer than the counties. It said food supplies remained strong and distribution was being prioritized. That statement may have been technically true in a warehouse sense and false in a dinner sense. There was grain, there were animals, there were packaged goods, there were warehouses outside damage zones, but distribution was the emergency. A pallet in the wrong state, behind a fuel shortage, with no driver, no working cold chain, and no safe route, was not food for the person waiting in line at a school gym. I said that plainly and got a call from a state office asking me to soften my language. I asked which word was inaccurate. The line stayed quiet. By then, the dimming had a schedule of its own. Morning stayed dull. Afternoon never warmed right. Solar panels still produced power, but output was lower and dirt on panels made it worse. Some farms had battery systems that help with small loads but not the heavy work. Grain legs, dryers, large fans, water pumps, refrigeration compressors, and barn ventilation did not care about positive thinking. A farmer near Pella told me he could keep lights on in his house and charge a radio, but he could not run his operation from a few roof panels under a dirty sky. That was an important distinction, and I repeated it. Household survival and agricultural production are not the same load. We started a county fuel board by accident. It was not official at first. It was just me asking callers to report gallons, needs, and delivery capacity in the same format. Name of county, type of fuel, estimated gallons, pump working or hand transfer, guarded or unguarded, priority need, contact through sheriff, farm cooperative, hospital, or emergency manager. After an hour, counties were using the format themselves. After 2 hours, a dispatcher told me to slow down because volunteers were copying by hand and could not keep up. That was the first time I understood that the broadcast had changed from news to infrastructure. I did not feel proud about that. Pride would have been out of place. A woman in Marshall County called to report that her husband had died 2 days earlier after a fall in a dark machine shed, and she still had cattle bawling at a frozen hydrant. She did not want comfort from me. She wanted to know whether anybody could repair a generator transfer switch. We found a retired electrician 7 miles away who had a working truck and enough fuel to reach her. That was the work now, not speeches, not hope. Names, roads, tools, gallons, water, feed, and weather. My son reached the first farm on his route late that afternoon by taking a county-approved detour behind a road crew. He had lost time, not the load. The farmer unloaded only part of the order because the county had asked him to share the rest with a neighbor whose delivery never came. That was the first good decision I heard all day. Not generous in a pretty way, practical. The integrator would hate the paperwork later if there was a later. The animals did not care about paperwork. My son called me from the cab and said the sky looked wrong over the fields, flat and dirty all the way to the horizon. He asked if I had heard from his sister. I had not. When my daughter finally called, she was outside the hospital near a loading dock, and I could hear engines behind her. She said a diesel delivery had arrived under escort, but a county agriculture truck was parked behind it waiting for a split load. She said people were arguing in the cold, and nobody involved was selfish. The hospital engineer had numbers for generator runtime. The agriculture coordinator had numbers for barns that would start failing without power. A deputy had a shotgun he did not want to use. My daughter asked me who should get the fuel. I hated her for asking, then hated myself for thinking that I told her the truth. The answer had to be written down before the truck arrived, or every delivery would become a fight. So we began saying it on the air. Counties needed fuel triage rules before the next truck came. Hospitals, water plants, emergency communications, and life safety response had to come first. Then agricultural operations where delay would cause mass animal loss, water failure, or loss of stored food. Then transport needed to move food, medicine, repair crews, and vulnerable people. Then everything else. People hated the order until they had to make their own. The order did not make anyone happy. It only gave a deputy something better than his own tired judgment in a parking lot. On the fourth day, the word famine entered private calls before it entered public statements. I did not use it early. A famine is not a bare shelf on one bad night. It is the sustained failure of access to food. It can happen with food still present in some places. It can happen with grain in bins, cattle in feedlots, and warehouses under guard. By the fourth day, serious people were asking what a failed growing season would mean if transport was already broken and stored food was being consumed fast. Nobody had a clean national answer. The models built for drought, flood, derecho damage, disease outbreaks, and market shock cover a dim sky after a nuclear exchange. The cold pushed farther south that day. Reports from Missouri and Illinois said the same thing. Weak daylight, strange temperature drops, supply trouble, road priority fights, and overloaded rural counties. We were not special. Iowa was just one piece of a belt that normally fed other places. The problem was national and probably global, but the fixes were local by necessity. A national order could say preserve livestock. It could not fix a broken pump outside Webster City by sunset. A federal food plan could identify priority corridors. It could not clear abandoned vehicles on a county blacktop without a tow chain, a tractor, and somebody willing to stand in the road. The strangest calls came from people who had food in the house and still felt hungry. Not physically hungry yet, mentally hungry. They had eaten breakfast, then counted cans, then eaten lunch, then counted again, and each meal felt wrong because it reduced a number. I understood that. Farmers do it with hay during bad winters. Hospitals do it with oxygen. Farm cooperatives do it with diesel. Scarcity changes the meaning of using anything. The first week of nuclear winter was full of people staring at ordinary supplies and realizing ordinary habits would kill them later. We told households to stop cooking food that would not keep unless they could share it safely. We told people with freezers on failing power to coordinate with churches, schools, fire stations, and neighbors before food thawed and spoiled. We told hunters not to start shooting near towns without coordination. We told people not to eat livestock medication, not to drink from drainage ditches, not to handle ash without protection, not to burn treated wood indoors, and not to run generators in garages. Those warnings sound basic. Basic warnings save lives when people are tired, cold, and convinced rules belong to the old world. Around midday, Cedar Rapids reported a bottleneck at a food warehouse because the warehouse had inventory but not enough working dock equipment. Forklifts were down or fuel limited. Battery lifts had charging issues. Drivers were sleeping in cabs and refusing some routes without security. A warehouse full of boxed food sounds comforting until you need to move it by hand through a cold loading bay while hundreds of people wait outside the fence. One supervisor told me he had more food than muscle. That sentence stayed with me. We had calories in the wrong shape, in the wrong places, behind the wrong broken parts. A grain elevator manager in Boone County gave one of the clearest explanations of the week. He said, "I can load corn. I cannot turn corn into supper." I asked him to stay on the line and explain it again for people who had never stood inside an elevator office. He walked them through it. Corn had to be graded, stored, moved, milled or fed, processed, packaged, cooked, or converted into animal protein through time and feed. Some corn was not food grade for people. Some was committed. Some needed drying. Some bins had quality risks. Some farms had grain but no safe road out. He was patient till a caller accused him of hiding food. Then his voice broke a little, and he said he had neighbors too. By the fourth evening, law enforcement started asking us not to name individual farms that had fuel generators or large feed stores. We changed the format. County-level reports only. Contact through official channels only. No private tank locations. No family names unless the family requested help and accepted the risk. This slowed rescue work but prevented theft. That was the constant trade. Speed versus safety, detail versus security, truth versus the damage truth could cause in desperate hands. I had spent decades believing more information was usually better. That week taught me information needed handling, not hiding, but handling. My daughter called after midnight from a break room. She said the hospital had accepted several patients from a rural care facility that lost heat. She also said a farmer had sent eggs and ground pork through the county kitchen, and staff had eaten their first real hot meal in 2 days. She wanted to know whether that farm would lose fuel because it donated food. I told her I did not know. She said that was not good enough. She was right, but being right did not create diesel. Before hanging up, she told me the generator note on the wall was down to hours, not days. She did not say she was scared. She did not need to. On the fifth morning, the light looked worse. I will not dress that up. It was the kind of dim that made people check their clocks, but I will not use a comparison because nothing in normal Iowa life matched it. Streetlights stayed on longer where power still worked. Roosters called late. School parking lots turned into distribution points. Snow flurries showed up north of where any forecast had placed them. The flakes picked up gray dust on windshields and melted into dirty streaks. Children watched from gym windows while adults argued over whether it was safe to collect meltwater. The answer depended on local conditions, and local conditions were exactly what most people did not know. We got our first county radiation chart that morning from a volunteer group. Using old survey meters, state equipment, and improvised reporting, I treated it carefully. Bad radiation information is worse than no information because it can send people into danger or trap them in place. We told listeners that 1 meter reading did not define a county. We told them time, distance, shielding, wind, rain, and location mattered. We told them ash was not to be treated casually. We told farmers not to spread potentially contaminated dust with leaf blowers, compressed air, or dry sweeping inside shops and barns. Then we returned to water because water was beating every other issue in the call volume. Water for people came first, then sanitation, then hospitals, then livestock, which fed people later if kept alive and healthy. That order sounded clean until a cattleman with 800 head called and said his well pump had failed. A mature animal can drink many gallons in a day, more in warm weather, less in cold, but still enough that hauling water becomes a full operation fast. He had a pond, but access was bad and ash was visible on the surface. He had neighbors with tanks but no fuel. The county had 2 tanker trucks and 1 driver available. People listening from apartments heard cows. Farmers heard a clock. The same hour, a school shelter in Des Moines requested bottled water for families from damaged areas. A hospital requested sterile water and generator fuel. A small town west of Ames reported low pressure and a boil advisory that was nearly useless for people without power. A hog barn needed water pressure restored to drinker lines. The emergency board had to choose between living humans in immediate need and animals that represented future food and current suffering. There was no good language for that. I stopped trying to make it sound decent. I said, this is the choice. Write it down. Own it. Do not pretend nobody chose. That was when the governor's office stopped calling and started sending text relays through intermediaries. I think they did not want my voice in their records. They wanted cooperation and I was cooperating. They also wanted confidence. Confidence was harder. They asked me to emphasize that state and federal agencies were coordinating food security. I said I would, if they gave me usable local details. How many fuel tankers were assigned to agriculture? Which rail lines were cleared? Which hospitals had priority windows? Which bridges were open to loaded feed trucks? Which counties could accept evacuees? Which cold storage sites were powered? They sent back a paragraph about resilience. I did not read it. Instead, I read verified county needs. Polk County, hospital fuel, shelter meals, water pressure issues in limited zones, avoid unnecessary travel. Story County, medical fuel priority. Agricultural generator requests pending, feed route delays north and east. Marshall County, bridge restrictions, need electricians, need livestock water support. Lynn County, warehouse labor needed through official channels, no private arrival at docks. Blackhawk County, shelter capacity strained, diesel escorted only. Webster County, water hauling requests for livestock, road crews low on fuel. Pottawatomie, interstate traffic control, do not attempt westbound travel without authorization. That did more good than any resilience paragraph. My son made it back to a guarded fuel yard late on the 5th day with a quarter tank and a truck that needed a belt. He sounded older on the phone. I know that is a common thing to say, but I mean his voice had less waste in it. He told me one of the hog sites had already begun emergency depopulation planning if feed and ventilation failed. He did not give details, and I did not ask. People who have never worked livestock imagine farms can wait because animals are outside in storybooks. Modern animal agriculture is productive because it is controlled. When control fails, problems come fast and they come at scale. The moral shape of the week changed there. At first, the question had been how to save everything. By day 5, serious people were asking what must be sacrificed to save the rest, which barns get fuel, which animals get feed, which fields get planted if cold persists, which seed stays in storage, which grain moves to feed, which to milling, which to emergency reserves, which towns can accept more people, which roads stay civilian and which become supply only, which patients move, which generators shut down non-critical loads. Those decisions were not evil. They were evidence that the old abundance had ended. A farmer from near Indianola called and said he had 20 acres he could put into potatoes if someone found seed and labor. Another near Ames wanted advice on oats because he did not trust a full corn season under the dim sky. A gardener in Cedar Falls asked whether every lawn should become vegetables. An agronomist told us the truth. Yes, more local food mattered, but gardens would not replace the calorie system by summer, and bad soil, bad seed, poor timing, contamination, lack of tools, and lack of experience would limit production. I let that hard answer stand. False comfort wastes labor. Still, we began collecting local planting knowledge because even a small harvest later was better than regret. That afternoon, the first organized rural defense calls came in, and I did not trust them. Some were reasonable. Protect fuel yards, prevent theft from elevators, escort medical deliveries, keep armed strangers away from shelters. Some were men looking for permission to become important. You can hear that in a voice. They used words about order, but what they wanted was control. I told listeners that food security required law, records, and accountability. A man guarding a fuel tank needed a county order, a schedule, a logbook, and another person watching him. A rifle in a bad mood did not make policy. I lost listeners for saying that. I do not regret it. On the 6th day, federal food trucks reached Des Moines under escort. The arrival caused relief and anger in the same minute. Relief because food came. Anger because the trucks were not enough and could not be everywhere. They carried shelf-stable meals, bottled water, medical supplies, and some infant formula. They did not carry feed for livestock, diesel for every generator, seed, fertilizer, or repair parts. The crowd near the distribution point expected the sight of trucks to mean the system had returned. The drivers knew better. They had come through long detours, controlled fuel stops, and roads lined with people holding empty cans. I interviewed one driver without using his name. He said his route from the south had taken nearly twice the normal time. He had passed convoys headed toward hospitals, military vehicles moving bridge crews, and private cars abandoned at ramps. He said the hardest part was refusing people along the road because his seal and delivery orders were strict. If he opened early, the load could disappear before reaching the assigned shelter. If he did not open, people cursed him through the windshield. He had a daughter somewhere near Kansas City and had not heard from her since the exchange. Then he asked me where to find diesel after unloading. That was the whole country in one question. The sky did not clear after the trucks arrived. That bothered people more than they admitted. Relief supplies are visible. Atmospheric damage is not something a mayor can unload with volunteers. By noon, we had reports of daytime temperatures running far below normal across wide areas. Some weather stations were offline. Some were suspect. Enough were consistent to make the trend impossible to ignore. I told farmers to think in terms of growing degree delays, livestock cold stress, fuel burn rates, and storage life, not normal calendar dates. The old calendar was still printed on every wall. It no longer had full authority. Fertilizer became the next hard topic. A man from a farm cooperative near Fort Dodge said ammonia supply was frozen by transport rules and safety checks. Another said dry fertilizer was in storage, but application equipment had fuel limits and crews were scattered. Nitrogen does not appear in a field because a farmer wants corn. It comes from production plants, pipelines, rail, trucks, tanks, applicators, trained workers, and weather windows. Even if seed was available and soil warmed enough, missing fertility would cut yields. If yields fell, feed fell. If feed fell, livestock numbers fell. If livestock numbers fell, protein supply fell. The chain was not complicated. It was just long, and every link had a hand around its throat. We also had to talk about ethanol. That got people mad. In Iowa, ethanol is not an abstract policy word. It is plants, jobs, corn demand, distillers' grains for feed, fuel blending, trucking, rail, and local economies. Some plants had shut down or reduced output because energy, water, transport, and market conditions were broken. Some wanted to restart because fuel was short. Some feed operations depended on byproducts. Some people wanted all corn diverted to human food, which ignored processing reality and animal feed needs. Some wanted all plants secured for fuel, which ignored food and feed balance. Nuclear winter did not erase old arguments. It made them colder and more immediate. By late afternoon on day 6, I stopped saying call if you need help and changed it to call if you can provide one specific thing. That was a big shift. Need was endless. Capability was useful. We asked for licensed electricians with fuel enough to travel under county direction, diesel mechanics, veterinarians, people with water tanks, people with livestock trailers, nurses off shift who could support shelters without leaving hospitals short. Ham operators were mentioned callers, but I kept the language general and asked for trained radio operators through emergency management. We needed operators, not hobby arguments. We needed working hands with names and locations. That created the first real network. Not a pretty one, a practical one. A retired school bus mechanic in Ankeny got paired with a county garage. A seed dealer with a warehouse offered inventory records to emergency planners. A restaurant supplier in Cedar Rapids reported cases of canned tomatoes, rice beans, and cooking oil that could move if somebody provided security and diesel. A small-town veterinarian built a list of barns at risk from water failure. A church in Ames started taking dietary notes instead of just head counts. An elevator manager offered scale access for supply trucks because accurate weight mattered. This was not hero work. It was paperwork with consequences. My daughter came on the line briefly that evening through a hospital office phone. She said the fuel order had held. Hospital first, water plant second, emergency agriculture third, transport fourth. People still yelled, but nobody guessed. She said the written rule made the deputy lower his shotgun. That detail nearly knocked me out of my chair. Not the shotgun. The lowering. That was what good information did. It did not save everybody. It lowered the temperature of one decision long enough for people to remain human. My son slept in his truck outside a county shop because the roads back were restricted after dark. He said he had eaten crackers and cold beans and felt guilty because the truck still had feed on it. That is what scarcity does. It makes every item accuse you. I told him to sleep if he could. He asked whether his sister was all right. I told him she was working. He said that did not answer the question. I said it was the only answer I had. We did not say anything for several seconds. Then he told me his windshield was covered in gray streaks again, and he was too tired to clean it. On the 7th morning, I quit waiting for someone higher up to name the thing. The sun was dim again. The cold had deepened. Supply lines were restricted. Food movement had become a guarded operation. Planting decisions were no longer normal. Livestock systems were failing in spots and surviving in others through local improvisation. Refugees were still arriving. Hospitals were still burning diesel. Water systems were still fragile. The national voice was still confident, but confidence did not pump a well. I opened the broadcast and said, "We are in the first week of nuclear winter conditions. Not the full depth of it, the first week. Plan from that." I expected anger. I got silence for almost a minute, which is worse in broadcasting than anger. Then the calls resumed, and they were better. Not easier. Better. A county planner asked for a template to report feed inventory. A hospital engineer asked for a shared fuel ledger. A farmer asked whether he should protect seed corn from freezing before worrying about machine repairs. A school superintendent asked how to convert bus routes into meal routes. A grocery manager asked whether to release food by household size or ration card. A sheriff asked for language to explain why private fuel tanks could not be seized without records. Naming the problem did not solve it. It stopped people from wasting time arguing with the sky. We built the survival network with ugly tools, paper maps, grease pencils, landlines, battery radios, county runners, sheriff dispatch, church volunteers, farm cooperative notebooks, hospital fuel logs, elevator scale tickets. Handwritten livestock counts, a few working internet links when power and routing allowed, a few satellite terminals guarded in public buildings. Nothing elegant, nothing smooth. The value was not the equipment, the value was the format. Every report had to say where, what, how much, who verified it, what route was open, and what failed if help did not arrive. If it did not include those pieces, it was a story, not logistics. That distinction mattered when the first fake convoy rumor hit. Someone claimed 50 trucks of food were coming from Omaha and would stop at every town along Interstate 80. It spread fast because people needed it to be true. I checked with 3 county dispatchers, a state transport contact, and a trucker staging near Council Bluffs. No such convoy existed. There were trucks, yes, not 50, not public stops. Not enough food for every town waiting on the shoulder. I went live with the correction and people hated me for about 10 minutes. Then a real convoy got through because the ramps were not blocked by crowds chasing a rumor. Truth can feel cruel before it becomes useful. A second rumor said farmers were poisoning grain to keep refugees from taking it. I shut that down hard. Grain quality problems were real. Contamination concerns were real. Treated seed was dangerous and not food. Flooded or chemically exposed grain could be unsafe. Ash and dust needed evaluation. None of that meant farmers were poisoning people. I told listeners that treated seed often has colorants and chemical treatments for planting, not eating. I told them not to grind random grain from a shed, not to feed unknown grain to children, and not to break into farm storage because they might steal something that would hurt them. That was not protecting farmers from hungry people. It was protecting hungry people from ignorance. The worst confirmed call of the 7th day came from a confinement operation whose backup power had failed during the night. I will not describe the inside of that building. The producer had done what he could. The county had tried. The fuel did not arrive in time, and the repair part was in a warehouse nobody could reach. He was ashamed, which made me angry because shame belonged to a system that had concentrated life behind continuous power and just-in-time delivery while pretending. Efficiency was the same thing as resilience. He asked whether to report the loss to agriculture officials or animal health first. Even then, with a ruined building behind him, he wanted the record done right. I gave him the contacts I had. That call changed the tone of every livestock report after it. People stopped saying, "We'll manage," and started giving numbers. Number of head, feed days remaining, water source, backup power status, ventilation risk, veterinary need, mortality disposal capacity, road access, fuel required per day. That was grim information, but grim information saved more than brave talk. A veterinarian from near Mason City told me he could triage by phone if producers gave clear facts. He said he could not drive to every farm, and people had to stop asking him to bless impossible situations in person. He sounded worn out enough to fall down, but he kept taking calls. At the same time, small towns began finding strength the cities did not have, not enough but real. People knew who had a backhoe, who had a generator, who had a wood stove, who had medical training, who had a commercial driver's license, who could cook for 200, who had a refrigerated trailer, who had a machine shop, who had a well that could be accessed manually, who had a barn safe for temporary shelter, who was trouble, who needed checking on, and who could be trusted with keys. Rural life has gossip, and gossip is usually treated as a nuisance. During that week, accurate local knowledge became a working database. I kept warning people not to turn that local knowledge into private kingdoms. A town council still mattered. A sheriff still mattered. A hospital board still mattered. A farm cooperative record still mattered. If a man with fuel became the man who decided who ate, the town would tear itself apart. If the loudest group took over a shelter, the old and quiet would lose first. If farms refused all outside coordination, they would be robbed one at a time. If cities demanded rural counties give everything without understanding production, the next month would be worse. Survival needed boundaries and exchange, not charity alone and not force alone. By the 7th afternoon, we had a working regional map that would have looked pathetic before the war and miraculous after it. Fuel points by county, not exact tank location. Hospitals and generator status in broad categories. Water systems at risk. Feed mills operating limited or down. Elevators able to load or unable. Roads open to heavy trucks, restricted or unknown. Shelters with capacity, full or closed. Veterinary contacts, repair crews, cold storage. Cooking sites, known false rumors, requests for escorted transport. It was not complete, it was alive, and alive mattered more than complete. That map also showed the truth nobody wanted. There was no way to keep the old food system running unchanged. We could preserve pieces. We could route fuel to critical nodes. We could reduce waste. We could protect seed. We could keep some livestock alive. We could move some grain. We could feed shelters in controlled numbers. We could prevent some bad decisions. We could not make sunlight return. We could not make every truck run. We could not make every freezer stay cold. We could not make every person who fled a damaged city fit inside a county that had planned for normal life. Saying that out loud felt harsh. Hiding it would have been worse. I got one last message from the governor's office that evening asking whether I would join a unified statewide communication panel the next morning. I said yes on one condition. The panel had to use county data and admit uncertainty. No empty confidence. No ample supplies without route status. No fuel is available without priority rules. No farmers will feed us without diesel, water, labor, and storage. No temporary cooling without saying crop calendars were at risk. No speeches that made people move for no reason. I expected them to refuse. They did not answer before the next hour began. My daughter called just after dark. Her hospital had heat in critical areas, reduced lighting in halls, and a kitchen running a strict meal count. She said the staff had stopped asking when normal would return and started asking what had to be true by morning. That was the right question. My son called 10 minutes later from a farm shop where a mechanic was replacing the belt on his truck by lantern. He said they had moved the remaining feed to 2 sites instead of 3 because one site had lost ventilation and could not take the load. He sounded angry but clear. I realized both of my children had accepted the week faster than most officials. Near 9 that night, a farmer outside Nevada asked if he could use an old corn crib for community food storage because the school freezer was unreliable. That question would have sounded backward a month earlier. It sounded intelligent now. Old structures, old equipment, old habits, old paper records, old diesel engines, old wells, old hand tools, old local relationships. We had spent years calling those things inefficient. Some were. But inefficient can still function when a sleek system stops. That does not mean the past was better. It means redundancy matters. And we had cut too much redundancy out of life because normal times rewarded speed. The broadcast changed after that. I stopped opening with national summaries. Anybody with a working receiver could hear officials speak. What people needed from me was the ground truth, so I opened with county reports, then fuel, then water, then livestock, then roads, then shelters, then weather, then corrections to rumors, then requests for specific skills. If the president spoke, I summarized only the parts that changed what a farmer, nurse, trucker, mayor, mechanic, or shelter cook needed to do before dark. That may sound disrespectful. It was not. It was triage. Political language had become too large for the room we were standing in. By the end of the first week, the disaster had become quieter and more dangerous. The first explosions had created fear large enough for the whole country to feel at once. Nuclear winter created 1,000 smaller fears that required daily decisions. How long to run the generator, whether to open a shelter, whether to plant, whether to move cattle, whether to share fuel, whether to guard a tank, whether to let strangers stay, whether to slaughter animals before feed ran out, whether to spend diesel on a hospital, a well, a feed truck, or a snowplow, whether to believe a rumor because believing it hurt less than checking it. I kept thinking about that dairyman outside Newton with the warm milk. On the first morning, he had asked whether a tanker was coming. By the 7th day, his question had become the whole country's question in another form. Is the system coming? Is the truck coming? Is the fuel coming? Is the weather coming back? Is someone with authority coming to make the choice clean? I had answers to pieces of it. The tanker did not arrive in time for all of his milk. Some was saved, some was dumped. The farm kept operating on reduced power. The cows still needed milking the next day. That was the part people forget. Even after a loss, chores continue. So that is what I told people before midnight on the 7th day. Chores continue. Not because life is normal. Because life is not normal. And chores are what remain when speeches fail. Check your neighbor, but do not arrive empty-handed. Report fuel honestly. Protect water. Keep records. Do not waste feed. Do not move unless movement solves more than it risks. Do not steal from farms and call it justice. Do not let farms turn inward and call it independence. Do not trust any number that has no county, no time, and no person behind it. Do not wait for perfect orders. Use verified information and make the least damaging choice available. The room was cold by then. We had shut off one heater to save generator load, and everybody kept their coats on indoors. The paper maps curled at the corners from damp air. Pencil marks covered Iowa in a way no official map ever had. I could hear somebody in the hallway reading shelter numbers to a dispatcher. I could hear a volunteer opening another box of batteries. Outside, the sky over Des Moines had no stars, no moon, and no honest darkness either. Just a dirty dimness from fires too far away to see and smoke too high to fight. I did not say that on the air. People did not need me to describe the sky. They could look out their own windows. I said we would keep the line open for county-verified reports through the night. I said hospitals should update generator fuel in hours remaining. Water systems should report pressure problems before failure. Feed mills should report formulas they could still produce. Farmers should report livestock emergency needs by county and category, not panic and not pride. Shelters should report capacity, meals, sanitation, medical needs, and security concerns. Drivers should report blocked routes without exaggeration. Officials should send details, not comfort. Then I took the next call, because the next call was from a man near Clear Lake with 2,000 gallons of diesel, a working pump, and a county sheriff standing beside him, ready to write it down. That was the beginning of the regional survival network, not a flag. Not a movement, not a miracle. It was a list that stayed alive because people kept adding verified facts to it. The war had burned cities and damaged the country in ways we still could not measure. The winter after it was moving through farms, hospitals, roads, water systems, kitchens, barns, and human judgment. We could not stop it in that first week. We could only stop lying to ourselves about what it would require. Food was no longer background. Food was fuel, water, labor, weather, animals, seed, roads, trust, and time. Once people understood that, we had something to work with. One more thing changed during that 7th evening. People began asking about seed in a tone I had never heard before. Seed dealers are used to pressure, but this was different. Farmers wanted to know whether corn hybrids chosen for a normal season made sense under weak sunlight and cold soil. Gardeners wanted anything that matured fast. County planners wanted to know whether public land could be planted and who would guard it, and who would harvest it, and where the harvest would go. The honest answer was that seed without planning was only a packet of possibility. It needed suitable ground, tools, fertility, water, labor, protection, storage, and time under a sky that no longer promised enough warmth. Still, we started the seed list because refusing to plan would have been another kind of surrender. We also started a waste list, which sounded cruel until people understood it. Spoiled milk, thawed meat, contaminated grain, ruined feed, fuel burned on failed trips. Empty trucks moving one way, generators running lights in rooms nobody used, volunteers sent to the wrong place. Every wasted thing had to be named because unnamed waste repeats. A restaurant owner in West Des Moines called to report food that would spoil within hours unless moved. A shelter cook in Ankeny had people in burners but not enough ingredients. A county deputy connected them. That saved one dinner service, maybe two. In the old week, nobody would have cared. In the new week, that was a victory with a receipt. The last planning call before midnight came from an old farmer near Atlantic who had lived through blizzards, drought years, low prices, high interest, disease scares, and the farm crisis stories his father told him. He said this was different because every normal escape route had a problem attached. If prices fell, you stored grain. If drought hit one region, another region shipped feed. If a barn lost power, a neighboring county loaned a generator. If a town flooded, trucks came from dry ground. Now the dry ground needed fuel, the trucks needed escort, the generator needed parts, and the sky itself was reducing the crop before the seed touched soil. He did not say it to scare people. He said it because old experience only helps when you admit where it stops. I do not know what the second week will take from us. I know the first week took the idea that the disaster was finished when the blasts stopped. It took the comfort of full shelves and turned every shelf into a countdown. It took normal weather and made every degree matter. It took family and placed it on opposite sides of the same diesel truck. It took every lazy opinion about farms and cities and ground it down into logistics. My daughter needs fuel for the hospital. My son needs fuel for feed routes. Both are right. That is where the country is now. Right against right, need against need, with a dim sun above it and a map full of pencil marks below. So I am staying on the air as long as the generator holds and as long as useful. Calls keep coming if you are listening from a farm, a shelter, a hospital, a truck cab, a county office, a school kitchen, a machine shed, or a house with blankets over the windows. Do not call to tell me what you fear unless fear comes with a fact. Call with what you have, what you need, what road is open, what pump is broken, what fuel is left, what animals are at risk, what people are waiting, what rumor needs killing, and what can still be done before morning. The long winter did not begin with snow. It began when food stopped being assumed. Now we count. We share what can be shared. We protect what must last, and we tell the truth while truth can still move.